Welcome to the Financial Flossing Podcast with Ross Brannan, guiding dental professionals to a brighter future. Ross Brannan is a financial advisor who knows it's not just about your teeth. He helps dental practice owners protect and maximize today's cash flow to plan for tomorrow's cash needs. Find him at rossbrannan.com. On the show, he brings together experts to help dental professionals looking to make smart money decisions to grow their income, turn their retirement goals into reality, and improve their lives. And now, here's your host, Ross Brannan.
Welcome to the show. My guest today is Levi Barlavi. Levy is a healthcare attorney from Los Angeles, California, who has won several awards, earned several speaking engagements, has been a great help to dentists throughout his career. Levy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ross. Thanks for having me.
So you have a very unique experience. We hear about, I'm in Florida, you're in California, but every other billboard in Florida is a personal injury attorney billboard. And you see, the litigators in movies and things like that, or the criminal defense attorneys, but you don't hear about healthcare attorneys a lot. But as a guy who works with dentists, I see a tremendous need for it. So tell me a little bit about what a healthcare attorney does.
Well, it's a broad term. Specifically for me, I help doctors with their business transactions. So I help doctors in different verticals with startups, acquisitions of practices, sales of practices, private equity, joint venture agreements, basically all the business contracts associated with a dental practice or other type of healthcare practice. I assist them in negotiating them and drafting them for those big deals that they get involved in throughout their career.
And so one of those things is like entity formation, correct?
Yeah. So if you think about it, when you're starting a practice, you got to ask a lot of questions for yourself. What type of entity am I going to use? What type of large commercial agreements do I have to sign up for? Like a commercial lease agreement. This is especially critical for dentists. And so I will work with client on helping them set up the framework for their practice to be successful in the future. And then also assist them with the financing, because they got to get financing in order to start up a project, or put them in touch with the right people who are going to help them get that project off the ground.
Yeah, that's really key, because like in Florida, a single member LLC doesn't have liability protection, but a dual member LLC does. And so these are the types of things that you're going to help them do. Should it be an S Corp? Should it be an LLC? Should it be a C Corp? Based on the situation there. So how did you get into this space? It's not something you hear about like in law school. It's usually like a real estate attorney, defense attorney, or the personal injury attorney, or the prosecutor, or something else. How'd you get into this space?
Yeah, I took a pretty circuitous route to get here. So I didn't know that I was going to be a deal attorney or healthcare attorney when I went to law school at Georgetown. When I came back to Los Angeles, where I live, I started working in defense litigation, employment litigation matters, and it just wasn't my cup of tea. I just did not enjoy it. I thought the process was poorly constructed. It didn't lead to good outcomes, and I didn't like the work that I was doing. I come from a large family of healthcare providers. I have a sister who's an OBGYN. I married a dentist myself. I have other doctors, cousins, who are doctors. And so when I decided to go out on my own, as you do, if you go on your own and you're not specialized, you end up doing a lot of different types of work. So for me, it was kind of a natural progression, because I had a contingency of doctors in my life and in my extended network. And once I went on my own, they started asking me to review their contracts. Hey, I have to set up a corporation, I'm about to buy a practice. And the light bulb kind of went off for me. And I said, this sounds interesting. So I did a lot of learning, postgraduate learning on business transactions and the nuances of healthcare transactions. And that was kind of the nucleus of the practice a couple of years after I started. And once I knew what I was going to do, it kind of took off from there.
Wow. It's really interesting. And sometimes it takes a while to find a niche, but once you find a niche, it's so critical just to dig down in that thing, and it just takes off. So let's talk a little bit about why I need a healthcare attorney if I'm a dentist. And, most people are like, well, I can read a lease, or, I can go online and set up my articles of organization for my LLC or whatever, why do I need to hire a healthcare attorney?
The way I explain it to clients who ask me that question is that, the experience of working with a certain segment of clients and only those clients. I don't service small businesses. I service healthcare businesses. So working with dentists for the last 10 years has given me an additional amount of knowledge in those deals that I can leverage to help them in their transactions. So basically, I am no different from a business attorney. So they do about 80% of what I do, but there's about a 20% difference where there's nuance to the deals that are specific. Like if you want to set up a corporation, I've seen a lot of CPAs or even general business attorneys in California set up general corporations or LLCs. Well, if you work in healthcare or if you read the rules, you understand that's not permissible. You have to have a professional corporation to set up, and you can only practice under a professional corporation. Similar with the leases, there's nuances to these leases that dentists have to really be worried about. That is a difference between setting up a dental practice versus a store that's just going to sell widgets. So we're really, really concerned about relocation clauses in the lease. We're really concerned about recapture clauses that terminate the lease upon assignment, and it's going to grab all and ruin the equity of a practice. So these are kind of the nuances, I think, that any specialized attorney that works with a segment of clients can give better value when they're working with a specialized attorney.
What about employment contracts? Do you do in that space?
I do. Yeah, absolutely.
And so what do you see? The typical dentist, he's running his day-to-day practice. What do you see the biggest mistakes that a dentist is making from a legal perspective that's easily fixable?
Wow, that's a very broad, open-ended question. there's so many.
Pick the easiest one. Low-hanging fruit.
Everything in a practice in a business is about how much risk are you willing to tolerate.
So it's all about liability. It always comes down to liability.
It's all about liability. And so, I'll give you an example of one thing. When I work with a client who's starting a practice, I always tell them you have to work with the end goal in mind. Don't worry about the legal stuff. Don't worry about the framework and all this stuff. Tell me what your goal is so that we can work backwards to set up the contracts and the right type of entity to get you to where you're going to be. So one thing is, working with goals and working backwards allows you to create efficient systems and structures so you don't cause headaches for yourself down the line. Liabilities really grow with the practice. And if you do things right from the outset, you're going to suffer less in the end.
How many times have you seen somebody just be cheap and not want to spend not a lot of money to make sure something's done right, and then it costs them exponentially more down the road?
Yeah, I mean, I did a lease a few years ago where in the lease agreement, there was a relocation clause. What this is, basically, it allows a landlord to unilaterally relocate a practice to any space in the building that the landlord wants. And this particular relocation clause didn't have anything that would mitigate for the amount of build out the dentist put. It could cost $300,000-$400,000 to build out a practice, or the size, right? If you're a 6-op practice running at full speed, and all of a sudden you're going into a space that only allows for 4 operatories, do the math, that's a significant hit on your gross revenue. So we were able to get that relocation clause out. That clause specifically wouldn't be as significant for someone who's selling shoes because they just put shelves and boxes, in the back, and they're fine. But for a dentist who has such capital investment, well, 3 months in, the landlord, not knowing that they agreed to this, tried to relocate my client.
Oh, wow.
And so if we didn't have that clause in there, that client would have suffered an enormous headache in terms of the costs of doing business with that landlord.
That would have easily been 100x the amount of money they paid you.
Yeah.
And the cost, it would be 100x.
Yeah. If you're spending a few $1,000s, I always tell my client, just look at a lease. If you're spending $70,000, $80,000 a year on rental payment. You multiply that by the year of the lease, 10 years, that's an $800,000 investment. A few $1,000s to have a set of eyes that's specialized to look at it and protect you is really just an insurance policy. I don't begrudge actually clients, who don't want to spend the money, so long as they know and they've baked in the risk for that somehow in their business plan moving forward. So, it's to each, they have to figure out what they're willing to tolerate in a business.
That makes perfect sense. Let's talk a little bit about buy-sell agreements. I see those a decent amount with when you're dealing with partners. How often do you see partners who just don't have a buy-sell and you have to go kind of clean that up?
Often. So, we're talking about an agreement that's going in a partnership when we have a group practice between the doctors, the partners, that protects their equity stake so that the practice can't just be split up or a partner can't sell to someone else, or mitigates for the risk of a partner dying by funding insurance. So you have a lot of these out there, especially, a lot of doctors, when they're starting a partnership, their friends, their colleagues, they just came out of dental school, they're 2-3 years out. They're on the same level in terms of financial wealth, same mentality. And so they just assume based on their good relationship, they can maintain it. But what happens is over the course of the next 10 years of a doctor's life, going from 27 to 37, they have kids, they have marriages. Those marriages might break up. They might suffer disabilities. And so where they started kind of on the same plane, they've kind of diverged in their life, and those outside factors affect the business. And so the buy-sell agreement is really the roadmap to mitigate for those issues moving forward so that you're not suffering, like we said, when those things happen.
And you've said to me offline that, partnerships can be challenging. They start off well typically, but you don't typically see a 30 or 40-year partnership. So if you go into a partnership, you just need to be honest and realize it may not last forever, right?
Yeah, I always tell my clients, after doing this for 10 years, I'm winding up a lot of partnerships that I started 10 years ago, and they're separating amicably, but it's still difficult. So I always tell my clients, good partnerships, 1 + 1 = 3, but bad partnerships can have such a negative effect on the practice. And kind of setting the ground rules and having buy-in early on what might the partnership look like when times are bad, not when times are good, helps the parties kind of get there if they run into problems.
Yeah, that's good insight right there. So let's change gears a little bit about DSOs. Everyone wants to talk about DSOs now. It's the elephant in the room. If there was ever a time to have a healthcare attorney, it would be when you're selling to a DSO, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. That's where you get into, whether you're setting up a DSO or selling to, there's so many compliance rules regarding the corporate practice of medicine and how to properly have non-clinical clinical partnerships or sell to DSO. Selling to DSO particularly, and you know this because we discussed it can be particularly difficult for seller doctors if they don't appreciate the level of complexity and the process and what the end result is going to look like after they've made their exit.
Yeah, it's, as you said, the level of due diligence is substantially more than if, I was a dentist and I was selling my practice to you as a dentist. You're going to look at just a handful of documents, get a feel for it, but it's literally like a financial body cavity search when you deal with a DSO.
Yeah. When my sellers, a lot of sellers in the business get very enticed by the multiples that a DSO can offer. And that's great. You should maximize your exit plan, but you have to also appreciate a DSO, private equity company that goes into a practice, is going to be far more detailed in terms of what they're asking and their due diligence with your financials than a doctor buying a practice. So that's one of the first obstacles. And that just gets multiplied throughout the deal. The deal's more complex. And then you will be expected as a doctor seller to stay on with that DSO for 3 to 5 years. There might be earnout requirements depending on your employment. So you might not get your entire cash consideration on the sale. And so if you're not prepared to stay in your practice and as an associate and see it changed by this new management company, and you can't stomach that, those 3 years are going to be very difficult. And I've had many situations where doctors, they want out after year one, but their payout, their total consideration, part of it's tied to their continuing employment. So, you might not realize the total gain at the end if you're not prepared to meet those commitments.
I know doctors who have sold to DSOs at a ridiculous multiple, but after 90 days, they walked away because they hated it so much. So they ended up getting that multiple they only got 75% of because that's all they had. And so the multiples can look pretty, but these are very shrewd companies. And, there is a lot more to the story than just the dollar bills that are promised. And in my experience, many times, this is in my experience, typically a 4 to 5 month transaction, and slowly but surely they can whittle that price and that multiple down where you were promised X. And by the end of the day, you're getting like maybe 85% of X. And that can be a challenge for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, if I'm just starting out as a dentist, and I don't have 2 nickels to put together, but I've got a big student loan balance and I'm trying to go start my own practice and basically leverage up with the bank, what are the things that I really need to look for in the legal world?
Well, first, the non-legal portion of it. The great thing is that these dentists can get 100% financing on their projects because they're good as gold. The default rate on these loans are a fraction of a percent, but they still have to budget. They still have to figure out their cash flow, their burn rates, talk to someone like you to help them get those things in order. But from a legal perspective, I always talk to clients and I get calls from clients who want to help with the startup or acquisition and are telling me what they need. And I always listen to them and then take a breath to, just stop them for a second and say, don't worry about the legal components. First, talk to me about your goals, because I like to look at the goals backwards. So we want to set up a framework, whatever it is, that's going to help you succeed towards those goals. Because what ends up happening is if you set up the legal framework the wrong way, and it's not synchronized with where the doctor wants to be, it's just going to keep compounding and causing headaches later. So for instance, if I have a doctor that wants to be a multiple practice owner, right? I will set up a different entity for each one of those practices because we want to keep the liability separate. We want to keep the accounting separate so that if they want to unload one of them, it's not all housed in one corporation, which is going to make the sales process with that buyer much more difficult. These are questions that you can't really appreciate until you start thinking about the vision and the goals first, and then you start in terms of the business plan and the legal structure.
That makes perfect sense. So what do you see? You've been doing this a long time and you see a wide variety of things, but in your opinion, what's the biggest risk that these dentists are unknowingly taking
in getting into practice ownership?
Yes.
It's completely non-legal related. It has some more to do with them. I think that the success of any business owner, and dentists aren't excluded from them, is knowing what you don't know and having self-awareness about where your skills are at. And so I see a lot of dentists go into practice ownership because they feel like, their friends are doing it, or they want to become a DSO multi-practice owner because that's where the downward pressure is coming at. But they don't know themselves very well, or they don't know their skills, or they don't know what they don't know. The most successful dentists are the ones who can identify where their gulf in knowledge is and then find the right team to help them. And so the corollary to that is my clients who I see who have had problems are clients who don't appreciate that or have blind spots and just run through doors and have to clean up a mess. afterwards. Does that make
Well, that
sense?
makes sense. It's very easy to go to school for as long as they go to school and then somewhat think you're invincible and you know everything when,
And
unfortunately.
this is the biggest problem with medical school, dental school, and law school, is that they don't train us to be business minded or be business owners. You're being trained on a technical skill, right? And so a lot of my clients, I just wish these schools would provide some sort of basic accounting, financial analysis,
Right.
business planning, to give the fundamentals of how to become a successful business owner when they start their own practice. So if there's any gulf, it's that lack of knowledge on the business side of things.
So as we wrap up here, if you were to give advice to a brand new dental school graduate, what would that advice be?
If I would, I talk to a lot of dental school students at these society meetings and on campuses, and I actually don't try to focus on the legal components of it. What I tell them is, create some sort of vision of your career. Don't just listen to what your friends are doing and assume that's what you need to be doing. Understand where you want to take your career in a year or 3 years. That might be practice ownership. That might be, becoming more and more specialized and working 3.5 days a week, making a killing. But whatever it is, start there and then use the couple years that you are associate to really gain the knowledge and keep your ears and eyes open and put together the fundamentals that you need to be successful in the career. So whether that is getting, business classes or legal advice or financial advice, getting your finances order, whatever it is, get yourself set up to meet that vision instead of just kind of, being a leaf running through the river and just kind of not having intentionality with your career.
That's good advice right there. So if people want to get in touch with you to talk to you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can find me at the Pacific Health Law Group. If you look me up online, my telephone number is 310-776-5384. And I'm on LinkedIn all over the place. So you just look up Levi Barlavi on LinkedIn.
You are on LinkedIn a lot. I see that.
Yeah. So I have my contact information. You can contact our office anytime.
Levy, I really appreciate your time today. It's been very, very interesting.
Thank you, Ross. Appreciate you having me.
You've been listening to the Financial Flossing Podcast with Ross Brannon. Tune in next week for our next episode.
This has been another episode of Financial Flossing with Ross Brannon, guiding dental professionals to a brighter future. If you liked what you heard, consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. For more on Ross Brannon, visit rossbrannon.com.
Registered representative and financial advisor of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS, OSJ, 3664 Coolidge Court, Tallahassee, Florida, 32311, 850-562-9075. Securities products and advisory services offered through PAS, member FINRA SIPC. Financial representative of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. PAS is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. North Florida Financial is not an affiliate or subsidiary of PAS or Guardian. California Insurance License Number 0L10073. Arkansas Insurance License Number 161-39032. 2021 119535. Expires 423. That last part can also say 2021 119535. Expiration April 2023.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by PAS, Guardian, or North Florida Financial, and opinions stated are their own. Ross is a registered representative and financial advisor of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS, OSJ, 3664 Coolidge Court, Tallahassee, Florida, 32311, 850-562-9075. Securities products and advisory services offered through PAS, member FINRA SIPC, financial representative of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. PAS is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. North Florida Financial is not an affiliate or subsidiary of PAS or Guardian. Arkansas Insurance License Number 161390032, California Insurance License Number 0L10073, 2022, 140344, expiration 624.